it's fun to make meme builds, just builds that do something ridiculous, even if they're not very good. But sometimes making a meme build actually turns into a pretty good overall build. And that's what happened in this case. So I wanted to make a build around Mana Strike, because Mana Strike has some fun procs on it. It also has this ability to push enemies around the map, which I always thought was kind of hilarious. So I went ahead and started working on a build. I've done it in the past. It didn't quite work out well enough. But this time, I think it's in a spot where it's build worthy. It's not the best build ever, but it's so much fun to play and definitely can do all the content. So I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what it looks like and talk about the pros and cons and let you decide if it's something that you want to try out. All right, let's go ahead and do an Echo. We're going to do a just basic empowered without much going on. So you can see what the build actually does, why it's fun, and how it performs. So the primary thing that it does that's so much fun is just it pushes enemies all over the place. Melee enemies can't even reach you like ever. The only things that are ever really any sort of a threat are going to be enemies that have a ranged attack, or if you get overwhelmed by melee enemies and you can't hit them all. But otherwise, they're never going to reach you. There's no chance. They can't. And the damage is good enough, especially in AoE, in particular in AoE, that they're not going to last very long. Also, on ranged enemies, once you start to make contact with them, unless they have a really large health pool, they're going to be stunned pretty much permanently. There's just not going to get out of it. So once you make some sort of contact with the enemy, you start to engage them with your attack, it's pretty much all over. And it's just fun to watch them go all over the place. They're just, I don't know. There's something really satisfying about watching enemies flail, just desperately trying to reach your character, just trying to get some sort of damage on you, but having no chance whatsoever. And it's even more fun in bosses. I'll talk about later how it's not the best bosser. The damage isn't great for bossing. It's still fun to do bosses because, especially the ones that have a lot of melee attacks, they pretty much do weird. They just do weird stuff. Like they're just all over the place, trying to get off some sort of attack on you, and it doesn't really happen. Or they just have to just move on from the melee attack onto something else after a while. And you can make them screw up their attacks in weird ways. I'll show a boss encounter with Rhea in a little bit where that's exactly what happened, and it's just funny. There's just something about meme builds when they actually are playable that it's a nice break from worrying about super hyper efficient builds, which again, this is a pretty good build and that's why I'm showing it. It's not underperforming as far as can't do content. It actually does mapping pretty quickly. I'm intentionally killing everything in this map. I don't have to. I could just move into the objective and go pretty quickly. It's not as fast as the speed clear builds, of course, but it's fast enough to where you're not going to feel like you're at a significant disadvantage from playing it. All right. So that's the mapping. And from here, we'll go ahead and get into the pros and cons of the build. So the pros are, well, number one, it's just fun. Like just pushing stuff around like that, as I hope you could see there, is kind of a blast. It's an enjoyable time, and it brings a little bit of fresh air to the game for me right now, where we're basically halfway through doing a patch. Playing something this silly that also still doesn't feel slow or sluggish is great. So that's his number one. Number two, it's got great CC, which is related to what's so fun about it. Pushing stuff around and basically stun locking them is a great time. And also effective in an Echo, where you just don't take much damage because of it. Number three, it's got good AoE, like it really does. The AoE is coming from two different procs out of the Mana Strike, and they together just do a lot of damage to groups of enemies. Very effective against groups. So those are its primary positives. We can also put it in there like clear speed is generally a positive. It's not a negative, so we'll say it's a positive. On the negative sides, it's squishier than a lot of builds for Spellblade because we're not really focused on, for example, war generation. We're not focused a lot on DR. We're focused on making the build work for the CC factor of it. So you can definitely, if you take a couple of hits, it might kill you. And you can get stunned a lot if you're taking a lot of hits in a small succession. So it definitely gets stunned more often than most of my builds if you're getting hit. But again, with the CC, you don't have to get hit. And so it's just a matter of play at that point. The biggest negative for it, though, is it's just not very good on bosses. So back to what it is good on bosses is absolutely silly to watch bosses get flung around. But it's going to take you a while to kill them, especially like Lagon. Like Lagon is an absolute pain in the you-know-what to fight on this build. But fortunately, bosses are a smaller part of the game. And if you're okay with taking a bit longer on a boss to do this build, then I think you're going to really enjoy the rest of it. So that's, you know, a decision you'll have to make on it. As far as gearing and being a pro or con, it's kind of in between. Like, it doesn't require any uniques, and there's a lot of flexibility in how you gear it. But it does take a decent bit of gear and a while to get Mana Strike up and doing all of the things it does here. It requires more than 20 points in Mana Strike. We'll go over that in the gearing session. So that's something to keep in mind. You can play it perfectly fine until then, but you won't get all of the benefits of this play style until you really get the full investment in it. So that leads us into the skill level for it. Like, it's not a high skill level, except you want to make sure you're not getting hit too much. So you really have to keep track of where the enemies are. The rotation is super simple. You use Flame Ward for defense and for offense, and then you use enchant weapon for major DPS, and then just teleport generally every 4 seconds if you can to get some buffs up, but not necessary. You can just teleport when you need if you want to. And we've got Elemental Nova just on use on teleport, so it adds some more damage and some more shock. As far as gearing, though, that's the bit more advanced stuff. So I am making this build with a lot of Exalteds, which really is just a hyper focus, particularly in crit, to make sure my crit's high enough. It doesn't need those, but they're certainly nice to have. It doesn't need any uniques, so the gearing is somewhat challenging, but not insane. You definitely don't need any legendaries. As you can see, I'm using no legendaries currently. But for a new player, it might be hard to get this up and running. So I do suggest doing it once you've got a bit of gear already in your stash. As far as future patch considerations, this is a meme build. It's not overpowered. The damage is absolutely fine, even a bit low on bosses. The only thing I could see getting nerfed is if, like, for some reason this got really popular. Like, knocking around the enemies like this is kind of weird, especially on bosses. They have changed some interactions kind of like that before, but they tended to be on broken builds that were just way too powerful. This one is definitely not in that range, so I don't expect it to get nerfed. And that knock around ability has been in Mana Strike since I started playing, so I don't see any reason why I'd change now. This build's probably pretty safe for the next patch. All right, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the actual build. We'll start, of course, with the skills and specializations, and the star of the show is Mana Strike. So you're going to need to go in 3 different directions to make this work. It's why you need so many points. The first one is going to be to get Mana Storm, which creates those mana arcs, and you're going to want to significantly reduce the mana cost of it. You can probably get away without this one, but if you're running Celestial Precision, it's going to be a bit harder to get enough base crit to make it worthwhile. So I do recommend all of these here. Then you're going to want to go down here to Mana Spark into Spark Charges. Spark Charges are the other part of the damage. So these 2 procs alone are how you're going to do just about all your damage. There's a couple of other things in there, but this is the vast majority of the damage you're going to do. Also, Celestial Precision is great, but you're going to have to choose between getting down here and taking that, because you'll need 2 points to do it, or moving to some of this stuff earlier. So if you are fine playing melee based and you're fine not getting the knockback early on, you can take this and it will help you get your crit cap. If you would like to forego that but still want to try to get crit capped, there is in fact a way to do that, and it's through Prismatic Gaze. So Prismatic Gaze is a unique that gives you base crit on your helmet. It rolls up to 4%. If you can get 4%, that is certainly preferable. 2%, of course, won't do nearly as much. But I was running a 3% with pretty good performance on it. But of course, I do have a lot invested into crit to get there. So you have to make that choice. If you have prismatic gaze, it's a bit easier because you can just forego it for prismatic gaze until much later. But if you decide to go the other route, or you're going to go this way at some point anyway, you're going to go up and take Swift Sap, into Rage Sap, into Teleporting Strikes, into Star Guide, and that's going to give you both the ranged part of this, as well as the auto target and another base crit. You're definitely going to want the auto target. It's just a lot smoother, trust me on that one. And then the last thing you can do, or depending on how you do it, I do not suggest doing knockback with melee because it's going to just cause you to miss a bunch. So I would definitely go this way after Teleporting Strikes, but whether you go this way before the crit base or the opposite, that's entirely up to you. You're going to want Foreign Sprite Blade to get to Repulsing Strikes, and Sprite Blade's area is actually really good too. It causes you to do a lot more Mana Storms and Spark Charges. And then you really only need 2 of 3 in Repulsing Strikes because you attack so quickly that's going to knock everything back. Even with a third of those attacks missing, it's really not going to make a difference. In fact, in some ways, it's a bit smoother. So I definitely wouldn't go beyond this. It's just a wasted point that's not going to really do anything for you. All right, that's Mana Strike out of the way. Let's talk about the rest of them. Flame Ward is fairly standard here for my builds. I want to go up and get Astonish to get the when stunned, just for an additional layer of protection. And I want Dual Aegis for the double charges. I've also got 3 of 5 here in Barrier for less hit damage. You could put 2 more in this and get a little bit tankier if you wanted to, but I wanted a bit more damage because that's just what I like to do. Dilation, 3 of 3 for that duration. 4 of 5 in through Flames, and Flame Runner to get a little bit more speed for mapping. This is another thing you could forego if you don't mind going a little bit slower, but I don't like going slow, so I take it. Infusion, 1 in there to get to Lightning Ward, which converts all the fire damage you've got in here to lightning to give you a bigger damage boost. Next up, actually you're going to take Teleport before Elemental Nova. This is just me despecking and respecking a bunch of stuff, so it's why it's out of order. But you'll want Teleport first, because Teleport is going to allow you to cast those Elemental Novas, so without this section of it, the Elemental Nova will do nothing for you. And we've got 3 of 5 in Resonant Plasma, 5 of 5 in Crystalline Passage for the armor mostly. I do have 1 stat buff, and I've taken Unstable Arrival and Intense Arrival. This is mostly for the memes. It's just more knockback, so you teleport knockback stuff, then you keep knocking them back with Mana Strike. If you'd like a little bit more damage or a little bit more defense, you could go this route instead. You could even go and get like global cooldown if you wanted to. It's not going to make a big difference, but it's an option. All right, then we'll take Elemental Nova, and we're going to go, of course, all into Lightning because we're a Lightning-based build. We've got 1 of 1 into just getting Nova. We've got 5 of 5 in the Spark Charge chance. We've got Overcharge, 5 of 5. Ascended Current to give us more shock effect on our shocks from Elemental Nova. 5 of 5 in Elemental Expansions to make a really large area. And then 1 in Charge Destruction seems to be all I've needed. If you need a little bit more, you could take additional 1 here and take out a maybe Ascended Current or 1 in Elemental Expanse, and that would be fine as well. All right, last up is Enchant Weapon. There are just not 20 good points in this, unfortunately. So I've done some things here that are a little bit weird. The number 1 thing you want is Celerity. 50% melee attack speed is just insane. It's so good. And then a concentration, so you do it for 4 seconds more. After that, I went up here and I did take 3 in Shivering Blade. Just start with 2. I just had to put a point somewhere, so this is where I went with it at the end. 4 in Icicle Strike for the Icicle chance, and on Icicle Pierce. This is just a little extra damage because really there's nothing else worth doing. So most of this stuff is melee elemental, but we're spell based. Even though we're running, a melee skill, all of our procs are spells. So doing something like this doesn't really do us much good. I did take 3 of 5 in Fulminate. This is not necessary. We build up 20 stacks of shock, which is the most you can get very quickly in this build. So quickly that I actually started with Stormtide, which, by the way, if you're struggling with getting enough shock, using a pair of Stormtides will fix that problem for you very quickly. I started with those. I dropped them because I was just building up shock almost instantly to 20 stacks. Wasn't even needed. So that's it for Enchant Weapon. We're really using Enchant Weapon for the attack speed. That is its primary function, and it's very, very powerful, so there's no reason to take it out. And that covers all the skills and specs, so let's move on to the passives. Moving on to passives, of course, we'll start with the mage base class, and the first two nodes are pretty much interchangeable depending on how you need to build your character at any given time. Scholar gives you health and mana. Health is going to be good all of the time. Mana also gives you a little bit of buffer for your base crit on Mana Strike. As far as Arcanist, Intelligence is good for a damage increase. It gives you ward retention, and of course resistances are nice too to help you cap it out. You can sort of shuffle these as you wish, as is best for your build at the time. Mage Flurry, attack speed is great in this build, so we're always going to take when we can. And then we've got Knowledge of Destruction. I recommend taking 5 of 10 of these to start with, coming back at this towards the end of your character building to get the last 5. And the 5 in Sun and Storms for the increased lightning damage. Now on to Sorcerer, we've got Calculated Destruction. This is one of the better nodes that we can possibly have. The spell crit here alone, plus your base crit from Mana Strike, gives you something close to a 30% chance to crit. That's obviously pretty good to start with. We also have 6 of 8 in Brainstorm for the spell damage and the mana regen. Mana regen, of course, helps make sure that we're not falling too far down on our percent mana and losing too much base crit. Seronomancer gives us increased lightning damage and chance to shock. We're really doing that mostly to get to Rift Bolt, which gives us Lightning Pen and Lightning Damage Leech. This is how you're going to regen your HP if you do go below your ward, which you will from time to time. On to Spellblade, the mastered class. We've got Elemental Affinity, which is always a great node. Elemental Damage, Elemental Resistance, can't go wrong there. 8 of 8 in Arcane Warden to get a lot of ward every time we hit, and we hit a lot. 5 of 5 in Arcane Shielding for that damage taken reduction. And also 5 of 5 in Shattered Ages to give us the damage reduction, plus the armor per Arcane Shield. You'll always have 4 stacks because you hit so quickly, so this is not going to be an issue. I do have 1 in Fire Blood just to help push us forward. I can't remember if it's actually needed. In fact, we can check. Yep, it is needed right now. So you do need 1 point somewhere, and this is where we're going to put it. Then we got 5 of 5 in Essence Duel, more attack speed, more ward gained on hit. That's great. We've got to take, of course, Gemini for the dual wielding. So this is going to be an important node to get early. Mana Reaver for increased or chance to gain mana when we hit. It's a 30% chance. So that's going to go off a lot. This is really going to help you keep your mana up top. Plus, the health is just an additional benefit on it. We've got 10 of 10 in Mental Fortitude, which gives us lots of intelligence plus ward per second. We've got 5 of 5 in Burden of Knowledge. There's a bunch of adaptive spell damage. Reduced cast speed doesn't really matter because we're using a melee attack. And Prodigy will round it out with 10 points there. Excuse me, 5 points there for ward per second per 10 intelligence. And this build, as is, gives us, let's see, 48 intelligence. So that's a good bit of ward per second. That covers the passives. Let's move on to gearing. Okay, so we're going to start with the elephant in the room on this planner, which is that I have a +4 to Mana Strike on here, which might scare you because those are hard to come by. Fortunately, though, you don't need one. It's definitely beneficial. It gives you a little bit extra room, especially with other places in your gear. But here's how you can get away with not having a +4. In fact, you can actually get away with not having even a plus anything, although you should definitely work to at least a +2. So in the tree for Mana Strike, we have several areas that are key. We've got the Mana Arc, we've got Spark Charge, we've got the base crit, and we've got the knockback. Of course, we've also got the range, which is super important because it's a ranged build. So how you get away with not taking the +4 is you take out Celestial Precision to take the base crit, which gives you 1 more out of this. Once you've done that, mana is not as important, like keeping it capped. So you can also take 1 from Essence of Control. Now, at this point, you are at 21 points. If you still don't even have a +1 to Mana Strike, you can take 1 out of Repulsing Strikes, which should still give you pretty good knockback, pretty effective. Like, enemies generally won't get to you. It won't be quite as smooth, but it'll be pretty close. That gets you right down to 20. Now you're perfectly fine except for one problem, which is you don't have enough base crit anymore. How do you solve that? So there's a pretty simple solution. If you have one, they're not that rare. You come into, we come into here. Oops, let me get rid of that. There we go. We come into here. We can find Prismatic Gaze right here, which is not that rare of a drop. It does say it's rare, so it's not very rare, so it's not that hard to get. And it's a level 60 item. At level 60, it's around the time where you're really going to start to think about crit, and you can get up to 4% base crit on Prismatic Gaze, plus 40% increased crit strike chance. This will, if you especially get a 4%, pretty much make up for the base crit you've lost. I was running with the 3% for a long time before I put on the tier 7, and that was totally fine. So this is how you get away without having all those points. Now, once you get up to like +2, +3, you can probably start thinking about getting rid of that, because at that point you'll have just about everything that you need in here, because you can take out, for example, one here, and it's still a pretty good build. You're still pretty good to go. The rest of this stuff is the more important. So if you get to a +3, you're good to go taking prismatic gaze off. Before that, though, you're probably going to want to keep it on. Once you've got it on, though, you can then put onto your helmet something like Spark Charge and Melee Hit, which is increased damage because you can stack those, increased CDR, health, and increased health. Going back to the body armor, the other options here that are really good, Lightning Crit Multi is great. I do have Freeze Rate Multi on this. Let me replace that real quick. That was just the body armor I had. Don't do Freeze Rate Multi as your base on that. Do basic, there we go. Do Adaptive Spell or Ward Retention. Either one of these are good. Let's switch that out right now. There we go. So increased health on both of these as well, or increased health and base health, just like you have on the helmet. As far as the amulet goes, Spell Crit and Crit Multi are great. We're going to want to try to get as close to 100% crit as we can, and we should be able to do that. I really like melee attack speed here on the amulet because melee attack is just so good. You can also run a bone amulet here, or you can run a gold amulet if you need more resistances. It won't be that much of a DPS loss if you don't have a jade. Not that big of a deal. As far as the weapons go, we're doing a scepter and a one-handed sword. We're doing a scepter over a wand because we can get increased melee attack speed. And the spell lightning damage base and the lightning leech is great too. That gives us 2 sources of leech, up to about 3% leech. That's more than enough for what we'll need. Chance to shotgun hit and chance to chill and hit are great as well. The sword, which is required if you're going to dual wield, you can't dual anything but a sword as a spell blade. Why? I don't know. Ask EHG, but that's how it works right now. We're running with right now a long sword, but you can actually get out of long sword, go to a crystal sword, which would be even better. That's just what I had on my character. So we go to a crystal sword if we can. That gives us more melee attack speed, which is the big thing there. Melee attack speed on the effects is great. Adaptive spell damage is great. Chance to slow is really good here, especially since we're trying to keep enemies away from us. And this is our pretty much sole source of chance to shred armor. It's all we're going to need. So that's why swords are great in that regard. Okay, on to the bottom half of the items. We have lightning damage here. Cleanse is always great. Increased health, and then hybrid health. You're going to want a lot of health even though you're building ward, because you're only going to build so much ward with this build, like 1,000 to 1,500. So you want as much EHP as you can get. Intelligence, lightning damage, crit chance on the rings. I got a copper on here. If you can somehow get 100% without copper, you can switch to silver rings and get more speed. But otherwise, you're not going to really need it because you're running teleport. It's not a big deal. You should be fine. Resistance where you can. Critical strike avoidance on one of the rings is really good to go along with getting yourself an empowered critical strike avoidance from Rain of Dragons. Other than that, we can put health on here if we've got space for it. The boots, always movement speed. Every time movement speed. Fire or cold resistance as a baseline. Intelligence is great. Hybrid health. We got necrotic resistance here. Any resistance goes. As far as the gloves, you could take leech here. You're not going to need it, so why bother? Melee attack speed, intelligence, get half our void resistance out of this. Hybrid health, another resistance. The scrying eye is what I put in here on the relic. You can go pretty much anything here though. That it's decent crit multi. It's not amazing. It's not that big of a deal. Worry more about the affixes you get. Increased lightning damage, spell crit, great. Frailty, you definitely want it somewhere, whether it's here or on your amulet, somewhere on your build. If you can get frailty, it's going to be a significant damage reduction for what you take. And you're going to get capped almost immediately because you attack so quickly with so many hits each time. And then a resistance here. Okay, on to the blessings. Crit multi is great on the Black Sun. Absolutely great. You can go crit strike here, but I recommend finding it elsewhere because this is a big source of crit multi. Shred lightning resist is awesome. It stacks with shock. So shock can get 20 stacks. Shred lightning resist can also get 20 stacks. That's 40 total stacks. That's really insane. Of course, the crit avoidance on Rain of Dragons, and I've gone with armor over on the last 2 blessings from Age of Winter and Spirits of Fire, just to give us a little extra damage mitigation on that side. This number especially will be multiplied too by our passive, which gives a multiplied armor per stack, so you'll be 80% more increased armor from that. All right, last thing on here is the idols. You have a lot of flexibility in idols in this build. I have 2 crit ones in here and chance to gain ward of melee hit. And health. So I put ward on melee hit and health in here just to show how flexible. You can do either one of those, it's fine. The crit is nice, but these aren't even necessary if you can get crit elsewhere. But if you don't, this is a great spot to get them. Double healths are always going to be great. Crit strike's going to be great if you need it. Ellie res, I really just put this in here as an example of just how flexible you can be with this. You can even run a unique idol, what's it called? Shoot, the unique idol that gives you armor on boss and rare if you want to be a little bit tankier. Like, that's an option too. You have a lot of choices here. I've done a lot of resistance pushing on this because there's just not a whole lot of good options really for the way we're making this build as far as idols. So this is the best I found. But if you find something with like a lot of lightning damage you want to put on there, feel free to do so. It's very flexible on the idol slots. All right, that covers the gearing section. We will now move on to the final section, which is the rotation. All right, let's finish out with the rotation, which on this build is super simple. There are only 4 buttons, which helps since you don't have Elemental Nova on your bar or in any sort of way useful to you. So you're gonna attack, of course, with Mana Strike. Pretty easy there. You can teleport your way around. You also might want to use teleport for some of your buffs. You might want to try to keep it up about once every 4-ish seconds. You do have a little bit of duration here. So about every 5 or so. Not the most important thing in the world. The buffs aren't that big, but if you want to, you can try to keep it up pretty much on cooldown, but mostly use this to get around. And then you're going to use Flame Ward for 2 things. One for defense, of course. It does a great job on defense, but also it adds more damage. So you can use it for a damage buff. It's really good along with Enchant Weapon, which is going to give you that melee attack speed. So use them both together, you just get much higher damage. Actually, there's 3 uses for Flame Ward because you also have Flame Runner for gaining haste. So if you're running around a map, you can use it for that. You will be more tanky while you're doing it, and you'll be faster, and you can get to the objective quicker. But other than that, if you're in a bad spot, use it for your damage reduction and your ward, or stack it on with Enchant Weapon. Any of those are a good option. You can auto cast Enchant Weapon, by the way. If you just really don't want to deal with it, make the build super easy, you can do that and just have it whenever it goes on cooldown. I tend to use it here just whenever I get into a pack I want to kill. I just wait and then I hit it and then I go. Pretty easy to use either way, so lots of flexibility on that. But yeah, very easy rotation. Use things as you want to, as you know it's important to do, but you only have really 3 buttons other than Mana Strike to worry about, and one's your movement ability, so very little to worry about. All right, that will cover the build. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great time with this build. It's a lot of fun, very memey. Definitely different than most of my builds. If you want to hang out while I make these builds on Twitch, I do that 5 to 6 days a week. Would love to have you there. Also have a Discord where our community is actively engaged. Would love to have you there as well. And a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I still don't have up the page for that. I am lazy, not lazy, I'm just slow on that. I need to get to it, but thank you so much for the support. If you'd also like to know how to support me through Patreon, I will leave the link below. Thanks again for watching. I hope you have a great time in Last Epoch, and I'll see you all again real soon.